Elon might be proof that time travel exists because he seems to have either more hours in the day than the rest of us have, or, or he's from the future.
He's really the most driven person I think I've ever met.
You just had a remarkable ability to make stuff happen that other people say is impossible.
When you look at all the pioneers in space today, you think of Jeff Bezos, you think of Richard Branson, Elon Musk.
Yes.
Who do you think is really leading the way forward?
I think SpaceX probably.
In all seriousness, I'm laughing because his ability to think cogently and thoughtfully about such a wide range of topics while running these multiple companies and seeming to be running them well is just, it's like it makes you shake your head. It's remarkable.
The hell do you make of someone like that? What did he do? He made an electric car. And then he built an infrastructure so that you could charge the damn thing wherever you drove. And then he made it cheap. And then he built a bloody rocket, which was 1/10 the price or less of a NASA rocket that you could reuse. And then he put one of his cars on top of the rocket and he shot it up into space. And then this happened, right? This all happened, and he's still alive.
Why is no one else doing these things?
When I was a kid, I didn't really have any grand design. The reason I started programming computers is because I like computer games. And I'd play lots of computer games, and I learned that if I wrote software and sold it, then I could get more money and buy better computers. So it wasn't really, with some grand vision or anything. I wanted to come to the United States because I think it's where great things are possible. It's where the technological frontiers are pushed forward. And I knew I wanted to be involved in that. I didn't know exactly how. I tried at first to convince my parents to move to the US, but neither of them would move. They were divorced. And so eventually I was able to get my Canadian citizenship because my mom had been born in Canada. So I moved first to Canada by myself when I was 17, and then a few years later I moved to the US. I thought, well, I can either work on electric vehicle technology and do my PhD at Stanford and watch the internet get built, or I could put my studies on hold and try to be part of the internet. And at first I tried to get a job at Netscape because that was the only internet company, and they didn't respond to me. So then I was like, okay, if I can't get a job at the only internet company, then I better try starting something. But I talked to my professor and I said, look, I'm going to try starting a company. It's probably not going to succeed, and if it doesn't succeed, can I come back? And he said, sure, no problem. And so I put my studies on hold and started the company. At the time, it wasn't from the perspective of making a lot of money, because nobody had made any money on the internet in 95. But it seemed to me that the internet was something that would create effectively like a nervous system for humanity. So whereas previously, if you wanted to access information, you'd have to go to a library. If you went to a lot of libraries, you still wouldn't have access to all that much information. But if everything got connected, then anyone, anywhere, if you were in sort of a jungle in middle of the Amazon jungle in South America or something, and you had an internet connection, you'd have access to all the world's information. In fact, you'd have access to more information than the US president did in, let's say, 1980. So I thought, well, I wanted to be part of helping make that happen, and so I decided to put my studies at Stanford on hold and started an internet company, initially to help the media companies get online, and that ended up working out. So we sold that company and then created PayPal, and the idea behind PayPal was simply to facilitate payments on the internet. Because at the time, if you bought something from someone, you'd have to mail them a check, and it would take weeks to conduct the transfer. And we figured out how to make it really fast and easy to transfer funds from one person to another. And that actually grew super fast. It grew virally. And so as our customer base grew, the actual rate of growth grew. This resulted in some initial challenges in scaling because we started off with 5 people in customer service. And after 2 months, we had 100,000 customers. So our phone lines exploded, basically. But we were able to overcome those issues. eBay bought the company in 2002, and it's sort of grown from there. So what that did, though, was gave me the capital to try to do some things that are fairly high capital. There are 2 areas that I really wanted to get into. One was sustainable energy, and the other was space exploration. And I started off initially with the idea of doing something in the space exploration arena. In fact, it wasn't actually with the idea of creating a company. It was initially with the thought of spurring interest in sending people to Mars. That's when I decided to start a rocket company. I actually didn't think it would succeed, and it almost didn't. So for various technical reasons, the first 3 launches did not succeed in reaching orbit. And so this is 2008. And so we're heading into the recession, and we had 1 rocket left. Unfortunately, in late 2008, that 4th launch did work, and we made it to orbit. And then we won a NASA contract after that. Fortunately, things worked out. But if that 4th launch had not worked, then SpaceX wouldn't be around. So it was a very close call. So in parallel, there was Tesla, and Tesla also almost died in 2008. The recession was particularly difficult for car companies. In the summer of 2008, we had to raise a big funding round, but because of the collapse in the financial system, that funding round didn't happen. We had to piece together the money to keep the company going from myself and existing investors, and we were able to just complete a financing round that was just barely enough to keep the company going. And we closed it on the last hour of the last day that it was possible to do so. It was Christmas Eve, 2008. That was also a close call. So while things are going really well these days, I think it's always important to remember that when you're creating a company, there are very dark times. And it's about getting through those dark times. That's the difference between success and failure. Whatever area that you get into, given that even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short. If you like what you're doing, you think about it even when you're not working. It's something that your mind is drawn to. And if you don't like it, you just really can't make it work, I think. There's no need even to have a college degree. I mean, if somebody graduated from a great university, that may be an indication that they will be capable of great things, but it's not necessarily the case. If you look at, say, people like Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, Steve Jobs, these guys didn't graduate from college. But if you had a chance to hire them, of course, that would be a good idea. If you think like, what is education? Like, you're basically downloading data and algorithms into your brain. And it's actually amazingly bad in conventional education, because it shouldn't be like this huge chore. Someone's standing up there kind of lecturing at people, and they've done the same lecture 20 years in a row, and they're not very excited about it. In fact, I think a lot of things people learn probably there's no point in learning them, because they never use them in the future. Because a lot of kids just in school kind of puzzled as to why they're there. Well, I think it's important to apply critical thinking to what one is doing. By that I mean just the fundamentals of logic. Do you have the right axioms? Are they relevant, and are you making the right conclusions based on those axioms? That's the essence of critical thinking, and yet it is amazing how often people fail to do that. I think wishful thinking is innate in the human brain. You want things to be the way you wish them to be, and so you tend to filter information that you shouldn't filter. That's the most common flaw that I see. And then I also tend to see that people, instead of reasoning from first principles, they'll do things because others are doing them, because there is a trend. They just see everyone going that direction, so they think that must be a good direction to go, which is sometimes correct, but then sometimes you're going to run off a cliff or something. So it's much better to really look at things from a first principle standpoint. What are the fundamental truths, or the most fundamental truths in an arena? And any conclusions, logic that you come to must be derived from those fundamental truths. I think also people tend to overweight risk on a personal level. It's one thing if you've got, a mortgage to pay and kids to support, and that if you were to deviate from your job, that, well, how are you going to feed your family and pay the rent? And okay, that's understandable. But let's say you're young and you're just coming out of college or coming out of high school or whatever, what do you risk? You're not going to starve. It's really, certainly not in any kind of modern economy. It's so easy to earn enough money just to live somewhere and eat food. Very easy to do. So I don't know what are they afraid of? They're mostly afraid of failure, I think. People should be less risk averse when there's not much at risk. There's a friend of mine who's got a great saying about creating a company. Trying to build a company and have it succeed is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. And it's sort of quite exciting for the first several months of starting a company, and then reality sets in. Things don't go as well as planned. Customers aren't signing up. The technology or the product isn't working as well as you thought, and then that can sometimes be compounded by a recession. It can be very painful for several years. Starting a company, I would advise people to have a high pain tolerance. New great entrepreneurs are born every day, and we'll continue to see amazing companies get built. But I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of high difficulty. But as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, if they stay focused on that, if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will. Make sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher. Depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? When my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA. We had just one computer, so the website was up during the day and I was coding at night. 7 days a week, all the time. So briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard like every waking hour, particularly if you're starting a company. And if you do simple math, say okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company. The final thing I would encourage you to do is, now is the time to take risk. You don't have kids. As you get older, your obligations increase. And once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that, before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it. There are many more ways to fail than to succeed. Particularly for a rocket, there's 1,000 ways a thing can fail and one way it can work. So you could have a lot of rocket failures to explore all the ways in which it could fail. So one great thing about Silicon Valley is failure is not a big stigma. If you try hard and it doesn't work out, that's okay. You can learn from that and do another company, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really one of the great things about Silicon Valley. Persistence is extremely important. You should not give up unless you're forced to give up. There's no other choice. That principle can be misapplied if you happen to be trying to penetrate a brick wall with your head. So you have to be cautious in always saying one should always persist and never give up, because there actually are times when you should give up because you're doing something in error. But if you're convinced that what you're doing is correct, then you should never give up.
The Boring Company kind of started more as a joke, because that would be a funny name for a company. It's not because of some epiphany that I had one day driving down the 405. I was touring for tunnels for years and years. For probably 5 years or 4 years at least, whenever I'd give a talk and people would ask me about what opportunities do you see in the world, I'd say tunnels. Can someone please build tunnels? So after 4 or 5 years of begging people to build tunnels and still no tunnels, I was like, okay, I want to build a tunnel. Now we're making good progress. We're funding the company for merchandise sales. So thank you for anyone who's bought our flamethrower. You will not be sorry, or maybe you will. It won't be boring.
For somebody who's just starting out as an entrepreneur, the internet is a great place to start. Because if you're just starting out, unless you've got a ton of capital that somebody gave you or you inherited or something, you have to start a company that requires a small amount of capital, where it's heavily weighted towards the intellectual capital in your head. So I think anything to do with with sort of software and with the internet is a really good starting point. It would have been impossible for me to have done electric cars or rockets right from the start, because those require money to get anything done. If you only do things that are certain to succeed, then you're only going to be doing very obvious things. When you're building something new, there's going to be mistakes, and it's important to recognize those mistakes, acknowledge them, and take corrective action. And the success of a company is very much more about how quick are you to fix the mistakes, not will you make mistakes. And if you see the difference between a startup that is successful and one that is not, and it's because the successful one, they both made mistakes, but the successful one recognized the mistakes, fixed them very quickly, and the unsuccessful one tries to deny that the mistakes exist. I'm always looking for what's wrong. In order to make the car better, I always have to be thinking very critically. And so when I see the car, I see all the things that I think need to be fixed to make it better. And so it's easy to lose the sense of wonder or just see the flaws. It's a difficult thing to reconcile, because if you want to make something better, then you must analyze it for the flaws. But then that kind of prevents the enjoyment of it. It's a difficult dichotomy. I mean, I'd love to just do innovation work and just do engineering, but you raise a good point, because a lot of life in general, in any job, there's you have to do your chores. I think to be successful at almost anything, you have to do the tough stuff and as well as the enjoyable stuff. You have to do the boring stuff as well as the non-boring stuff. And if you don't do your chores, then bad things will happen. But if they don't do the things that they don't like to do, then the company will be in trouble. Yeah. You have to, you basically, it's more fun to cook the meal than to clean the dishes, okay? But you need to clean the dishes. What really matters is for someone's contribution to a company is how they are as an individual and how they affect others around them. I mean, you could say it's also analogous to a sports team. The best person on the team is not necessarily the one who scores the most goals. It could be the person who assists in the most goals. And if there's one person on the team who's just wants the ball all the time and just wants to kick it at the goal, that can actually be detrimental. So it is important to weigh personality and, are they going to be a good person, and what people like working with them, and that kind of thing. It does make a difference.
You've been compared to Henry Ford, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs. Who do you compare yourself to?
I don't really compare myself to anyone. I mean, there's certain people that I admire from history that I think are great. Certainly many of the scientists and engineers and literary figures and so forth. And I'm a big fan of Ben Franklin, who's a scientist and sort of thinker. And he was the kind of guy who did what needed to be done.
Could you tell me, and could you tell also to thousands of people who maybe will be motivated by your answer, what keeps you fighting for your vision? What helps you to reach your dream?
Well, I mean, I think I'm kind of constitutionally just geared to just keep going. I don't know. And if we don't succeed, then we will be certainly pointed to as a reason why people shouldn't even try for these things. So I think it's important that we do whatever is necessary to keep going.
There are a lot of negative things in the world. There's a lot of terrible things that are happening all over the world, all the time. But life cannot just be about solving one miserable problem after another. That can't be the only thing. There need to be things that inspire you, that make you glad to wake up in the morning and be part of humanity.
There are American heroes who don't like this idea. Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan have both testified against commercial spaceflight and the way that you're developing it, and I wonder what you think of that.
I was very sad to see that. Those guys are heroes of mine, so it's really tough. I wish they would come and visit and see the hardware that we're doing here, and I think that would change their mind.
When you had that third failure in a row, did you think, I need to pack this in?
Never.
Why not?
I don't ever give up.
You're obviously a very competitive person. You're competing with the likes of Jeff Bezos
Jeff who?